So we still have a few people joining right now, and I'm going to kind of use this opportunity, which is sort of a preamble, to do three things in rapid sequence. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be very candid. I'm going to show you a commercial. I'm launching a Kickstarter today, so I want you to be aware of this. And more people still joining. Okay, see, if after a certain point more people join, let's make an agreement to everyone scream at the same time, finally. No, let's not do that. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a second to show you the Kickstarter that I'm about to launch. Then, well, actually, let's start with introductions. Then I'll do the Kickstarter, and then we'll do a little bit of contextualizing before we start the event proper. I have somebody else here in the waiting room to admit. And so introductions. My name is Cassie Brighter. I'm a writer and a public speaker and a sex educator. And I'm the founder of Smart Sluts, which is a sponsor of this event and the Kickstarter that I'm about to launch. My pronouns are she, her. I am a woman of trans experience, and I'm from Argentina originally. If you detect a little bit of an accent, it's a mixed accent, Russian and Argentina. Yeah, a fun upbringing. I've had the privilege of knowing Janet for about 3.5, maybe 4 years. Janet, is that right?
That sounds about right.
And we've done a few things together, a few conferences, a few panels, and so I somehow managed to rope Janet in to do this, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the fact that it's working out. Hi, Janet. Obviously, Janet is the author of The Ethical Slut, but also the author of GirlFag, and someone who knows the world of kink from topping and bottoming.
And in betweening, yes.
Literally wrote the book on bottoming and the book on topping. And
I should correct you slightly here. I co-wrote those books with my beloved Dossie Easton. So we need to.
I keep doing that to Dossie. One of these days I'm going to have her on and she's going to throw the book at me. Co-wrote. I guess what I meant to say is you wrote the book and Dossie also wrote the book, and the two of you wrote it together. That's yes. My save.
We just try to be really careful to make sure people are aware that we both did all this work together. We don't.
Very true. And I'm so glad that you point that out. How are you, Janet, today?
I'm fine today. How are things there?
Well, other than the fact that the world is on fire and the United States is going through interesting moment.
Oh golly, yes. The old Chinese curse about me, you lived in interesting times. These are interesting times.
They sure are. You know, when I was growing up, I at one point bemoaned that I missed the 60s.
I was there for the tag end, and it was pretty cool, although I was too young to take advantage of a lot of the 60s, but I got to see them anyway. And yeah, I went to Santa Cruz, which is still pretty much the 60s in Santa Cruz, so that helped a lot too.
So it turns out that I didn't quite miss them, because here they are again. Okay.
Yeah.
So so I'm going to do a quick commercial of Smart Sluts, if everybody doesn't mind, and then we'll get back to this. Here we go. So the group that I founded is called Smart Sluts, and I started it on Facebook, but it's outgrown Facebook. So I'm just about to launch a Kickstarter, and this is a Kickstarter right here. And what I'm launching is this website right here, which is going to be a community website for women of all types and non-binary folk. And we're going to basically replicate the Facebook experience without inviting Zuckerberg into the room. And we have some amazing conversations about the woman experience and female sexuality, and it's just been tremendously cathartic for all of us in the group. And I'm going to actually launch the Kickstarter live. So here we go. Launch now. We are live.
All right. A historic moment.
Hi, my name is Cassie Brighter. I'm a writer and a public speaker. And this is available to one and all at sluts.news/Kickstarter. Sluts.news/Kickstarter. That's hard to say for a foreigner. /Kickstarter. The name Smart Sluts is actually very indebted to the book, The Ethical Slut. I was thinking about the Ethical Slut when I came up with the name. And also I was thinking of the fact that somebody had called me on Facebook, had called me a dumb slut. And I was thinking, well, you got half of that equation right. Janet, how did you come up with the Ethical Slut as a name? How did Dossie and you come up with the Ethical Slut?
It was actually kind of a private joke between us. It was the working title of the manuscript, but it never occurred to us the book was actually going to be called that. Except then we finished the book and we couldn't think of another title. Everything else we thought of sounded like a textbook, you know, open relationships in the new millennium, just dry stuff. And, you know, we asked around and everybody said, no, you have to call it the Ethical Slut. And so it was, we were very nervous about it, but it turned out to have been a really good decision.
And, you know, I've experienced a polarized reaction to the phrase smart sluts because of the word slut, which is so charged. Yes. And I picked it intentionally to provoke that reaction. And I'm wondering how this was, you know, 10 years ago, 11 years ago.
Actually, it is now 24 years ago since the first edition was published, or pretty close to that.
Holy the first cow. Edition was in so I imagine that back then there was a completely different reaction.
It was a very different world back then. We would have to explain the word polyamory because that was not a widely recognized word in 1997.
You mean you both cheat, right? That's what you mean.
Yeah, well, I remember talking about the book to an audience of other authors and somebody saying, well, I don't think that's ethical. And I said, okay, why? And she said, because you're cheating. And I said, no, you're not hearing me. This is a thing we do with the consent of our partners. And she just kind of short-circuited on that. She couldn't comprehend how that might be.
That's hilarious. Yeah, and luckily now there's a little bit more of a forefront. I'm one of the organizers of Polytopia, which is the polyamory conference here in Portland. And at least in my part of the town, it feels a little bit more recognized as a relationship configuration.
Yeah, no, if you go into urban centers on either coast, it's pretty much a given that you'll be talking to people who know what you mean when you say polyamory or an open relationship. But in the heartland, often not yet. So yeah, still work to be done.
So one of the early questions that I wanted to ask you, I once heard Bob Dylan talking about, and you know, not necessarily a warm and fuzzy guy, and he was complaining about the fact that people would walk up to him and would talk to him about songs he wrote 20, 25 years ago as though they were current in his mind. And he would make the point of like, you know, I wrote that over 2 decades ago and I moved on. And I'm glad that it resonates with you, it's part of your world, but it's not where I'm at. Yeah. And so I'm wondering to what extent you see yourself as a co-author of The Ethical Slut, and to what extent you're thinking more of GirlFag, or you're thinking of topping and bottoming, or you're just now thinking just about retirement and like, let me be.
I am at work on another book, but it's a ways in the future yet. But if people want to see the work I'm doing on it, it's at slutandsons.com. It's a book about the years in which I was coming out into kink and into poly and into bisexuality and into gender play in about that order, and raising my kids at the same time. And wow. The three of us growing up together during those years. So.
And you know, that's an interesting thing, the intersection of our lives as a soccer mom or as a professional. How do we leverage that, and how do we present ourselves to the world? And what I mean, I had the luxury of the fact that my life burnt down when I transitioned.
Yes, well, that's not a pure blessing. I don't think that must have been a hard time.
No, I say that with a certain measure of sarcasm, but what I mean is I got to reinvent myself from scratch, and all of the people I associate with nowadays, the friends that I have, even the work that I do, it's all congruent with my persona. There's nothing that I could post online that would shock anybody.
Yes.
So how did you handle it back then?
Yeah, I've gotten there too, eventually. Back then, my concern was not that my kids were going to be traumatized by knowing what I was doing with my life. They're pretty resilient and sophisticated guys. And I felt strongly that they could deal as long as I was careful about my personal boundaries. But the world is not a place that loves kinky women or slutty women. And it was very much on my mind that if someone wanted to come after me, the first thing they would do is look at my tax returns, which were pretty clean. The next thing they would do is look at my parenting. And so I was more conservative with the choices I made with the guys back then than I would have chosen to be just for their sakes.
Yeah, that makes total sense, especially when your livelihood is tied to respectability or a persona of sorts.
Yeah.
I was speaking with Elizabeth Sheff, who is also an author in polyamory, and she was talking about severe consequences that she experienced
Indeed.
as a result of being out publicly as polyamory.
Yeah, it would be naive to suppose that that does not still happen to people. It happens to people all the time. The choices that you make about your kids, your family, have to be mediated by that knowledge that you are putting important parts of your life at risk when you choose to come out publicly. And a lot of that depends on the kind of work you do. Obviously, for me, it's kind of a non-issue because I do the work I do because I'm out. But if you were a school principal or a children's librarian or someone who does elder care, those things can be very risky. God knows if you're a politician. My personal belief is that at least the Clintons were probably poly. There was a lot about their lives that read poly to me, but they just can't be out about that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's been a lot of chatter about the word privilege, and I think that it's misunderstood and stuff. But privilege essentially is when you don't have to worry about something, when something doesn't have the potential of causing you harm, such as the most obvious example I can think of is a man could walk out of a bar at 3 o'clock in the morning and walk 3 blocks to his car without thinking of potential threats to his sexual self or even just to his personhood in general. And whereas we carry keys in our hands or whatever. And so with that in mind, I'm struck by the fact that a friend of mine was bemoaning that she couldn't post a picture of her husband and her boyfriend.
Yeah.
And she worked for a judge.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the judge perfectly knew that that was the configuration, and but it was just not done.
Yeah, no, the world is not a positive place yet. It's better. It's much better than it used to be, but we have a ways to go.
Yeah.
A long way to go.
When marriage equality came on, there was a little bit of chatter at the time about like, oh my God, is polyamory next?
Yes, I was actually asked to do an op-ed on that topic for the New York Times. I think it was for the New York Times. Maybe I did one for CNN.com and one for the New York Times. And what I said in it is that we're going to keep coming up against this for as long as the government stays in the marriage business. And what needs to be done is to get government out of personal choices and offer whatever kinds of tax breaks or other kinds of support based on circumstances and not on pieces of paper.
But it makes sense for the government to run our relationships, being that politicians are known for being really, really non-toxic when it comes to relationships. Yeah. Okay, so there's a quote, and this is Dossie quoting a flower child. In the book, it says, "We believe it's okay to have sex with anybody you love, and we believe in loving everybody." And it's a sentiment from the late 60s. I'm wondering how you see that framed in 2021.
I just yesterday was looking at a glossary of poly terms to see what they had to say. And they, of course, had an entry for the ethical slut. And there was an overtone of criticism in it because we talk more in slut about being sexual with multiple people than we do about being loving or romantic with multiple people. But I think that dividing line between being sexual with someone and loving them is a pretty artificial barrier. And I think it may not be the case that someone you're having sex with is the person you want to live with. I mean, Dossie and I if we had tried to live together, this would not have ended well. We're very different. We live our lives very differently. But look what we have had together. I mean, we've been friends, lovers, co-authors, co-collaborators for almost 30 years now. So do I love Dossie? Yes, I do. Do I want to be romantic or domestic with her? No, I don't. But it's love. I've felt profound love toward people that I've had one night stands with because the connection was just lapidary and precious and tiny and perfect. And do I think those people would have become a major part of my life if I'd been in a position to see them again? Maybe, but probably not. But that doesn't mean it's not love.
There's like an ancillary aspect to polyamory, or ancillary benefit, I would say, to polyamory. And it's, I think, whenever we get to rearrange, redefine, and just reanalyze an aspect of our lives, and this is something that's been very part of my trans experience, just to get a chance to take a hard look at things that other people take for granted. And in the polyamory case, one of the things I see is that the way we fall in love, fall out of love, transition to friendships, the idea of a breakup. One of my closest friends, who, to give you an example of the kind of friend that she is, and you know, Kate, she flew to LA and she drove me from LA to Portland when it was time for me to move.
Very sweet.
And at one point we were lovers, and then we transitioned into this friendship over time, and we never broke up. We never officially broke up.
No, things tend to move a lot more fluidly in polyland, where someone who was your main squeeze last year may be a casual partner this year and maybe a friend the following year, and then may go back to being a main squeeze again. Because one of the problems I see with monogamy as it's practiced now, I don't think monogamy is in its own way, unto itself, I don't think it's problematic, but I do see some problems with the way it's generally practiced. And one of those problems is there's only one picture in our heads of what loving someone means. And it's living together and sharing a joint checking account and being romantic, being sexual, all of that. And you're supposed to do that all with one person, which means that there's no way to connect with people in between. Either you're the love of my life or you're garbage and I never want to see you again. And there's no space in there for friendship, for how deeply you know someone like that, for loving them in a different way. There's just not that model in most monogamous relationships, and I think that's a profound loss. It really do.
We also really take for granted monogamy. Recently, I posted in Facebook that there are a lot of challenges and complications and difficulties with polyamory, and there's a lot of challenges and difficulties and complications in monogamy.
Yes.
There's a lot of challenges and complications being alone.
Yep. I don't think you get to have a trouble-free life. I don't think that's what lives are for.
Being human in general is a bad start already.
Yeah. So you just choose what kind of problems you want to contend with. Contend with them, and if they're more than you can deal with, then try something different.
Although I think that we all find as we go into polyamory that communication is paramount. Communication skills, conflict resolution, things like that are utmost importance, as they are in most cases. But when you're trying to balance and trying to satisfy several relationships needs, it becomes even more important. So it's good to be skilled at that. And you spend some time, you spend a good amount of time on communication. You mentioned Fighting Fair in Love and Marriage by Dr. George R. Back in the book.
Yes.
What other things have you found over time are helpful in terms of, because we've had things like nonviolent communication as a model that's been introduced, and active listening and stuff like that. What have you found that you would add to that pot?
Anything that gives you some time to breathe and think. It is a natural impulse when there's a conflict to adrenalize and the intellect cuts out and there's just this argument that is in your face and is unignorable, and people are saying things they don't mean. And when they do say things they do mean, then the other person isn't hearing it the way you thought you said it, because everybody is adrenalized, everybody's a little triggered. And of course, if there's a trauma history, you can cube that. It's So I think whatever technique works for stepping back, taking a little time, getting your emotions back to baseline or near baseline, and then meeting again later to discuss the problem when you're in a more rational frame of mind, which is, don't get me wrong, incredibly difficult to do.
It
All
is,
of us,
yeah.
when we're,
You have a practice, you describe in the book the idea of the 20-minute fight.
Yeah.
And I read that and I rolled my eyes because I'm like, that's so unrealistic to just cut it off and be like,
everybody
okay.
wants the last word, of course. It's our nature to want the last word. But it's a self-discipline to hear that alarm go ding and to shut the fuck up for a while and go do whatever the thing is that helps you calm down.
I love the idea of the gibberish fight. The idea.
we did that once as an exercise in a tantra class, and it's great fun. You just
yeah,
sort of,
absolutely. And if you're unfamiliar with it, you're listening to us and you're familiar to us. To us, we describe it, Janet. You go.
Well, it's the two of you act as though you're having a fight, and you vocalize it at each other and use your gestures and whatnot, but nonsense. Imagine Donald Duck being mad at someone, going, and you just yell at each other like that until you feel a little bit better. And of course, it's so silly that it tends to put you into laughter, which is always a good idea. Laughing is a thing that is good for us. And after you've blown off all that ridiculously overplayed rage, you can go back to it in a calmer frame of mind.
What I found in conflict resolution is that quite often we think that one person wants to go to the left and the other person wants to go to the right. And what's really happening is one person goes to the left and the other person would prefer to have bananas instead of apples. Like, it's not two vectors conflicting with one another. They're completely different conversations.
In my experience, at least 90% of all conflicts boil down to semantics, which means you can't really resolve them until you pull back and define your terms a bit.
Yeah, and also it's a little bit of like, I need to be heard.
Yes.
I need to be seen. And somebody could have the humility of saying, I'm going to make it about you for a little bit. And then hopefully it's reciprocal, right?
Learning to listen without spending your listening time thinking about what you're going to say next is so difficult and so important, because if your wheels are grinding because you have some devastating comeback that makes you obviously right, except it never does, because that's not the way fights work, but you're not hearing them, you're not seeing them, you're not taking in the facial expressions, the gestural overtones, the body language, as well as the words, which you can only see those things if you're focused and listening. So learning how to just let go of your need to be heard right then and listen. And then when that person has run out of things to say, then it's your turn to say the things that you want to say.
Absolutely. I come up with this model that we tend to observe, analyze, or process and react in rapid fire succession. We observe, we think, therefore we feel. And each one of those could be fail points, right? You could have observed incorrectly. I think I used with you the example that maybe he's quiet because he's holding in a fart, not that he's mad at you.
Yeah.
And, then on that, you analyze and you, like, in my example, it's like, I noticed that he's being quiet. And then I add to that, he must be mad at me, which is could or could not be a correct assumption. And then the reaction to that could be off too. So even just like you're saying, just giving time, adding time to that, and just sitting on it. But do you think that in polyamory, there's the frailty, there's the added liability that I could have an intense argument with my lover, Michelle, and then you're talking to me and you have no beef with me, but I'm charged up because I've had an argument with a loved one. You're a loved one. 2 and 2 equals 4, and now I'm at you.
That's part of being ethically poly, is not dumping stuff from one of your relationships onto the other one. Again, not always easy to do. And it can be a fight, like you're describing. It can be that you've parted from someone you cared about and you're sad. It could be that you're in high level new relationship energy and you're all sparkly and happy and you don't want to talk about anything else but this wonderful new person in your life.
That is so annoying.
Yeah, it really is. And none of that is fair to dump on a person who's not part of it. It's really easy to get in the habit of counting on the person that lives with you to be your dumping ground for whatever issues you have in your life. But there are some issues, if you're a poly person, that you need to find someone else to talk about them with, because it's not fair to your partner who's not getting any of the goodies from this new relationship of yours to be getting all the bad stuff. That's unreasonable.
Yeah, and one of the things where we make a mistake is that one of our lovers might be better than others at empathizing and listening.
Yes.
And then another one might be better at making us calm. And then we start specializing them, and we go to one just to extract sex out of them, and go to another one to extract listening out of them. And that could become fraud too.
It's fine if everybody is in agreement that that's what this particular relationship is for. But if one of these people is expecting to be a more holistic type of partner that is for more than one function in your life, and you're only using one of their functions, then that's not really an even-handed relationship. You know, I think a lot of us have had relationships that are basically booty calls, where this person is for having sex with you and you are for this person having sex with, and cool, nothing at all wrong with that, as long as it's what both people want.
Yeah, and by the way, I came at this from the frailty aspect of it, but I also wanted to emphasize, I think this is one of the best positives of being polyamorous. When people who are used to monogamy and have a monogamy state of mind come into polyamory, one of, in my opinions, I want to run this by on here, your thoughts on this. One of the biggest failures is that they are acting out poly, they're doing poly behavior, but their mindset still remains monogamous. They're still trying to be everything, the one and be all to their lover. And one of the great things is the relaxing that happens. Like the example I keep using is, I don't like roller coasters.
Yes.
So if I'm dating someone who likes roller coasters and we're monogamous, either they miss out on roller coasters for the rest of their life, or I have to be like nauseous and vertigo on top of some stupid thing. And I'm not yucking people's yum. This is just me.
When Edward and I first moved to Eugene, the first personal ad I ran was not for a lover or anything like that. It was for someone to go to the theater with, because Edward has a chronic pain disorder that makes sitting for a long time in a chair very painful for him. So theater is not fun for him, and it's a really important part of my life. So I found myself a swell little gay man, and we go to the theater together, and you know, that's our function together. We occasionally have a meal or something, but mostly we're theater buddies.
Someone recently described theater in the same way. They compared theater to anal sex. I thought it was terrific. They said, you know, it's for everybody. It's not just for gay men, but like, you know.
There was an opening number at the Tony Awards a few years back with Neil Patrick Harris singing a song going Broadway, "It's not just for gays anymore." So
that's right. So we were talking about this thing about not bringing to one lover the baggage from another lover. I want to touch on comparison, because comparison could be damaging if one lover is telling me really excitedly their new relationship energy, or even just another relationship, and they're telling me how, even sometimes people do it in a recriminatory way. You know,
why can't you be like him?
Yeah. John always washes the dishes when he's over, or you have no idea the way Marcella makes me come. It's not.
That's just, I mean, leaving aside the ethics of it, which maybe, but it's rude. It's not good etiquette to compare a person to another person.
Etiquette is a really important word. I think that in relationships, etiquette is very underplayed, and I'm glad that you bring it up, because I think that a good understanding, a good self-discipline of what's kind and what's appropriate, it would go a long ways.
Considerate is a nice word. Being considerate of a person's feelings. And
exactly.
when someone is adrenalized with anger or grief or fear or love, that tends to perhaps not be as important as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the arts of polite poly is to be considerate of your partners. And
Polite Poly, that would be a good book.
it would, wouldn't it?
You have a big section on jealousy.
Yes.
And I'm going to go at this from kind of a playful angle because I want to talk about the religion of polyamory and how like people will talk about it in a way that to me sounds religious in the
Yes.
fact that you're not practicing polyamory right, and you're supposed to, you know, genuflect 3 times in the altar of compersion before you get up every morning. And jealousy is a human reaction. It's a natural human reaction. So
anybody who has raised more than one child knows that jealousy is kind of coded into us as humans, or for that matter, more than one dog. Mm-hmm. If you give identical bones to 2 dogs, they will inevitably drop the one you gave them and go take the other dogs while the other dogs goes and gets theirs, because jealousy is hardwired into us as sentient creatures to want what the other guy has.
And I think that potentially a path towards healing or a path towards resolution in jealousy is to make it about us, not to make it about them. Yes. So if he's coming home smelling of her and that makes me jealous, instead of talking about his behavior, I can talk about my insecurity, I can talk about my feelings, I can talk about my wound.
I think the most important thing to consider about jealousy is that it is not just one emotion. Different people process jealousy differently. For me, it might be, mine tends to manifest as competitiveness. But for somebody else, it might be territoriality. For somebody else, it might be insecurity. And you can't begin to work with an emotion until you know what emotion it is. So you kind of have to unravel this big knot of jealous feelings and try to look at them each and think of solutions to each, because when you're just trying to encounter the whole knot as a knot, you're not going to be able to untangle it.
Quite often, jealousy is trauma response. If you have abandonment issues, if you have bonding issues as a child, if yes. you've been neglected, then that's what could be speaking out.
Yep, there's all kinds of different ways to be jealous. And what they all have in common, and the reason we have a word for it that we call jealousy, is traditionally the way a monogamous or mainstream person resolves jealousy is by requiring their partner to do something different. In poly, we try not to do that as much. We try to look into our jealousy, tease it apart, and try to solve it ourselves with whatever kind of support we need from our friends and partners. But if I'm feeling jealous, that's not your problem. I mean, if I'm feeling betrayed, if you made an agreement and you broke it, yeah, that's your problem. You broke an agreement. But if it's just like you did something that I knew was part of our agreement and I'm still feeling a little gut punched by it, that's mostly for me to work through. And it might be that I need some reassurance from you. You know, it really, I didn't expect to feel as jealous as I did, but I was really having a hard time. Can you please reassure me that you love me? Can we please make some time for just us? Can we maybe set aside 1 or 2 behaviors that are just ours that we don't do with other people? Whatever would make me feel a little bit less at sea and unable to manage my emotions.
I love that you use the word reassure me, because it's not punitive at all. It's not about you did something wrong. It's about, could you please, you know, put a little balm on me?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's the difference, I think, between poly views of jealousy and monogamy views of jealousy is, if I'm jealous and I'm monogamous, it's because you did something wrong. If I'm jealous and I'm poly, it's because something is bothering me. Yeah. And really, if you think about feeling jealous because you did something wrong, that is utterly disempowering for me. I've just put the burden of change on you and I have no control. So it doesn't work very well.
I
to
like
lay
to
your
use the
jealousy on someone.
example that supposing that I've damaged my hand in some way. I mean, this example would work better outside of lockdown because now we don't touch.
Yes.
But if I've damaged my hand in some way and then someone comes up and shakes my hand hurts, and it definitely hurts as a result of their actions. But it's not necessarily fair to put the accountability on them
No,
because,
unless I've asked them to please not shake my hand, in
right,
which case, if they forgot, okay, people forget. I have one doctor who's this enormous bear-like chalky man. And now that there's quarantine, of course, it's no longer an issue, but I spent years trying to train him not to shake my hand because it hurts. It's in my thumbs.
And I'm trying to train myself to keep all the comments in the chat for later, but there's one that's germane to exactly what we're talking right now. Jess is saying that we have to be careful about jealousies about you and not about something that a partner did, because it could be used in gaslighting when the
Yes.
other person is actually doing us wrong. So that brings us to the topic of agreements and breach of agreements, which is actually, we keep thinking that the breach of agreements is like this cliff, and we're not supposed to go over the cliff. And the moment we go over the cliff, everything is lost. And instead, in human relationships, a breach of agreements, a coloring outside the lines. Just think of a 6-year-old trying to color and going outside the lines. It is a fairly common occurrence, and we need to have protocols for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. People are going to fuck up because we're people. And hopefully they did it by accident. There was perhaps an area of agreement that you thought meant one thing and they thought meant another. Often I see these things going astray because somebody has one definition of what constitutes sex and another person has another definition. And so the first person has what the second person considers sex, which feels like a breach of agreement.
And in contracts, what you have is you have the main agreement point, paragraph 26 or whatever. And then you have all of these addenda to the paragraph explaining exceptions. And the example I'm thinking about, this is a fictional situation, but suppose I have a lover who I'm seeing on Tuesdays, and that's my agreement with my other partner, that I see Roger on Tuesdays.
Yes.
And then it so happens that my other partner is out of town. Roger happens to be in town, happens to be available on a Thursday, and's got tickets to a wonderful play or something enticing, or has finally bought the interesting sex toy or whatever it is.
Yes.
So now Roger wants me to come over, and it would be a loss. It would be a lost opportunity for me not to go over on a Thursday. And nothing is keeping me, my partner's not around. Every rationale is saying you should do this, but it's outside of the agreements. And maybe I have the impulse control to get on the phone with my other partner and say, hey, let's talk about it. But maybe I don't have that impulse control.
I would say developing that in impulse control should probably be a priority for you in that case. But yeah, the correct poly action would be to check with your partner. You're gone and Roger's here and we want to play. Is that going to be okay with you?
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that your partner would go, well, yeah, I'm not there. Go ahead and play.
Definitely, but so now I want to touch on the situation where the damage has been done, where you have to go to a person and you have to say, we have a hard conversation ahead of us. I love you very much and I respect you, and in general, I'm trying to keep our agreements holy, and yet here's an agreement that I violated, and I need to talk about it with you because I want to be transparent and whatever, and how to do that without throwing a shoe at each other.
Yeah. You can't change the past. That's the first thing to go into a discussion like that. The question is not what should you have done differently, because that's totally fucking useless. The discussion is how can we keep this from happening again? We obviously need to shift or clarify or change our agreement.
It might be that it's a change of agreement, because maybe one person has been holding their breath on this and has felt that this has been stifling and limiting, and maybe they just can't anymore. This is something that things need to expand on or something like that.
There's a reason why we talk in the book about agreements rather than rules or anything like that. Agreements happen when you agree on something. And if you don't agree on it anymore, it's no longer an agreement. So it has to be fluid.
Yeah.
Particularly early in a relationship, frequent check-ins about agreements